On this night, there was an encounter with one of these porcelain face masks. Without further delay, I bring you the story of the doll face. There was an uncertain feeling in the air that night. So Joanne decided to sleep in the front room. She felt troubled. Her dog was feeling kind of antsy. Joanne had a golden retriever. It had been raining all day. She'd put her dog out a couple of times, but really quick. But she really wanted to give the dog a good walk before she went to sleep. It was about 12:15 a.m. in the morning. So she took the dog outside, decided she was going to walk down the street. Everything was quiet. All the lamp posts were on. There was a little bit of a mist down at the end of the street, but things were too quiet. So she put the leash on the dog, walked down the street. She made her way back, but she kept glancing over her shoulder periodically. She felt like she was being watched. Now, she had no problems taking care of herself. She had several degrees in martial arts, so she can really take care of things if anything happened. So she kept walking the dog, and as she got close to her home, she looked back one more time, and there stood a hooded figure. Her dog started to growl. Joanne just stood there frozen and thought she was going to get mugged. So she quickly tugged on the dog's leash and walked the 20 feet or so right into her walkway. Got up onto the porch and looked around, and she didn't see anyone standing down at the end of the street. So she thought she could have been imagining things, or it could have just been someone out for a walk, wearing a raincoat perhaps. So she thought nothing of it. So she went inside and cleaned up the dog's paws and got herself a drink of water, and then went to settle down. After a couple of hours have gone by, she was feeling uneasy and got up to look out the window, and it just started to rain very lightly again, and she could hear a little thunder rolling in the back. So she tried to go back to sleep. Her dog was feeling kind of antsy again and trying to get her attention. So Joanne got up again. So she looks out the window, and right across the street from her home, there's that same figure standing there with a cloak. So she looks a little closer and she realizes that there's no face to the cloak. Looks like they're wearing a mask, like a shiny white mask of some sort. So of course she gets all these images of all these horror movies she's seen, starts to conjure up a lot of feelings and fears. So she goes to the front door, unlocks it, steps outside, and yells across the street. And this figure, this apparition, whatever it was, just turned away with its back to her. So she yelled out again, and it started to walk away. Then suddenly it ran very quick, faster than anything she'd ever seen in her whole life. This thing just sprinted down the road. That really freaked her out. She wasn't sure she should call the police or not. So she came back in, locked the doors, checked the back door also. She figured somebody's probably lurking around and try to break into some of the homes. But then she couldn't sleep and sat up in her bed. And then her dog again kept walking around and trying to get her attention and walking towards the door. And she said, well, you know what, I don't want to really take her outside by herself because I don't know what's going on. So she took the leash again, put the dog outside with her, and as the dog was doing his business on the lawn there, the dog started to walk away, and she called her dog back, and the dog wouldn't come. And then the dog started to growl. And then she looked over, and just down at the end of the road, there was that figure again standing there. So this time Joanne took her dog, brought the dog inside, got herself some good running shoes, put on a good raincoat. She went out her back door with a flashlight, and she lived in a detached home. So as she walked between the two houses, she waited there in the dark between the two homes to see if this person or whoever it was would walk by. And sure enough, right across the street, she starts to see the person walking with this long raincoat like a cloak. And then she looks at its face, and it looks like a porcelain face mask. So she doesn't say anything. She stays between the houses. She waits a few more seconds, and then she jumps out, flashes the flashlight on its face from across the street, and starts yelling. The figure just stood there and then started to laugh. So Joanne starts to run across the street to chase it down. She says it took off quicker than anything she's ever seen in her life. And Joanne could run. This thing was like 5 times quicker than her, like supernatural. It ran so fast that it got down to the end of the street within like 5 seconds, which would normally take you about 20. Joanne was really freaked out and said, look, I'm calling the police. This is just too weird. So she goes back inside the house. She picks up her phone. She comes out onto her porch. And as she comes out into the porch, there it is again, standing in front of the house, just staring at her. She puts the phone down, walks out into the porch, and says, you need to take your mask off. I've called the police. Actually, she hadn't. She had picked up the phone, was starting to dial when she looked out and saw it again. So in reality, the police were not called. So she came out and she said, you need to take off your mask. This is not a joke. I'm in no mood for jokes or games. This is very weird. It's freaking me out. Who are you? And it just stood there. But she started to come down her steps and slowly walk across her lawn. Now she was about 20-25 feet away. And as she got closer, this thing just stood there still. And when she got close enough, she said she could make out 2 eyes behind the mask. They never blinked. They were just staring at her, but they were very dark. She was now about 15 feet away. And she said, look, I'm gonna hurt you if I come any closer. Who are you? This thing started to laugh at her and laugh. Joanne lunges forward to tackle it, and it just dashed right by her. And when she turned around, this thing was already halfway down the street. By this time, some of the lights on the porches had come on, and a few of the neighbors came out and said, hey, what's going on? And Joanne told them, look, this is what happened tonight. This is what I saw. So everybody was concerned. I thought maybe someone was trying to pull a practical joke to scare people. Or again, maybe someone trying to, rob their homes. So after a couple of minutes, they decided they were going to call the police. Joanne said, I was just going to, and I dropped the phone down to come out and investigate. But as they were talking about this, suddenly at the end of the street, everyone saw, and when I say everyone, might have been a group of about maybe 6 or 8 people. And there it was, standing at the end of the street, laughing. And they said to each other, you know, that's got to be a joke. So someone decided to get into their car, started the car up, played it cool, and then kicked it into drive, stepped on the gas, and just gunned it down the road. And they said by the time they got to where this thing was standing, it had gone across the other road, literally in seconds, and the car started to chase it down the road. The only thing between the car and this apparition was probably about 40 feet, 30, 40 feet. And all of a sudden, it just vanished into thin air. He slammed on his brakes and he was in shock. It just literally vanished right before his eyes. So he exited the car with his flashlight, looked around, saw nobody, got into his car, drove back. He explained to everybody what had just happened. And as he was doing that, suddenly this thing appeared again across the street, laughing at them, mocking them. A few of the men decided they were going to give chase. So they ran across the street and started chasing this thing as fast as they could. And they were just catching up to it, and suddenly it was just like as if it put into 5th gear, and poof, off it went, right down the street into the mist. The guy stopped running and said that's impossible. That's humanly impossible. So they started to get this overwhelming feeling of fear and anxiety. So they turned around quick and ran back and said, look, we're dealing with something totally different here. He said, if we call the police or if we call anybody else, they're going to think we're crazy. But we know what we've seen. So let's just go back in, call it a night. Hopefully, don't give this thing any more attention. Lock our doors. Some of us will be up and we'll be watching out in case someone is planning to rob us. Soon the sun started to come up and the birds started to announce the dawn. A few of the people had come outside with coffee cups in hand. We're talking about the previous night's events. They looked up and down. Nobody. So they continued talking and just drinking their coffees. And then one of the neighbors a little bit further down the road came over and said, hey, listen, just wanted to let you know it was kind of strange last night, but I saw a bunch of you guys running down the street and there was some commotion going on. And I said, yeah, you know, we were chasing this thing. It looked like it had like a shiny doll face on, like a porcelain mask with like a hood and a cloak. And the neighbor says, well, I saw you guys running down the street, but you guys weren't chasing anything. What? He says, yeah, I saw you guys running down the road, but there was no one in front of you. I said, well, maybe you had missed it, probably had run by already. And he said, no, I was up watching everything. He said, you guys kept running up and down the street and somebody got in their car and it looks as though you guys were chasing something, but I didn't see anything. So the guy started to get really nervous and he said, no, we saw something, definitely saw something. And he described what he saw again. And at this point, the neighbor just said, well, you know what, fine, whatever, but I'm telling you what I saw. There was nothing there. So everyone looked at each other kind of dumbfounded and said, what the hell? Were we the only ones that saw this? Joanne was still uneasy about the whole thing, and all of a sudden she's like, oh my God, I just remembered something. She goes, a few years ago, I picked up a small porcelain doll at a garage sale. She goes, I'll be right back. I'm going to go inside and get it. So she went inside, went to the basement, opened up a box and got some knickknacks out of there. And she couldn't find the doll anywhere. She's getting really nervous because the doll looked very similar to what she saw last night. With a dark robe with a hood on it, like a cloak. And the face was like shiny white porcelain. So she's looking through, she can't find it, so she goes into another box. She can't find the doll at all. So she comes back out and she says, look, I can't find it. But she goes, I swear it looks like what we saw last night. So after a few minutes of going back and forth, she looks over and there's her dog standing on the porch with something in its mouth. And at first Joanne thought it was a rat or something. And she said, get over here. She goes, drop that down. She goes, come. And the dog wouldn't come over. So Joanne started getting angry, and after a few times of getting the dog to come over and calling for it, she walked over, and as she's walking over, she sees that the dog is holding in its mouth the doll. Joanne starts to freak out, and the neighbors started to come over, and the dog drops the doll onto the porch. They're all looking at it, and there it is, the doll with the black cloak. Faced up, the white porcelain face with the two dark eyes. Everyone started to freak out, and they said, this is exactly what we were running after last night. It looks exactly the same, but that's impossible. That's a doll. How can that be? So the dog picks up the doll again, turns around, goes into the house, right through to the back door, so they follow the dog through. The dog puts the doll down and starts digging and digging and digging and digging. And they're like, just let the dog do its thing. And he's digging and digging and digging, and suddenly they see some cloth material. And then Joanne goes down to take off the rest of the dirt on the top of it, and she pulls out a porcelain doll. Joanne starts to tremble, and the neighbors are all looking at each other and trying to make sense of all of this. Two identical dolls. Same cloaks, same faces, like twins. Is it possible one of them was coming back for the other? We will never know. Joanne took both dolls, placed them in a small box, and buried them in the backyard. Until this day, there have been no further encounters with the doll face.